Welcome. We are here to present the Alveary 2023-24 book talk. I'm Carrie Forney,
I'm Kelly Christenberry.
and we are part of the curriculum team, and we are excited to share these books with you. We're going to start off with architecture for the ninth grade, and there's a very exciting book that we're going to be trying for the first time, and it's called What Adults Don't Know About Architecture, which the title is kind of funny because it really is referring to the fact that I don't think it's not just adults, it's pretty much all of us don't know about architecture. And it's very exciting because it's looking at things that are, what are the ideas behind architecture, and what's beauty, and why do we sometimes think that there are what makes a building beautiful? Why do we like to live in certain places and not others? Or how do we identify what's behind that? So we are looking forward to lots of great discussions with students over just these ideas in this book. So that's a new one for this year, and it'll be through several grades. Along with that is a book that we've used before called 50 Buildings That You Should Know. And this is one that we've used for several of the rotations for history. And so this will just be bringing in the 20th century buildings that go along with this time period. And we'll apply those same principles from that first book to the buildings that are now for this time period. So that should be a really fun combination that's kind of new for this year. Then for art, as one of the artists is Jacob Lawrence, and we're just very excited about looking at his beautiful pictures. And as we've done before for the high school years, we try to come up with some book that will bring just a little bit of background to it, some of the history, some of the broader understanding of music, art, everything all together. And so we've got a book called Harlem Stomp. It covers all sorts of aspects of what was going on at the time that Jacob Lawrence was painting, and how his pictures really fit into that, and what else was going on that influenced him. So we're looking forward to just how that ties into the history as well, and Kelly will be talking about that in a minute. So one of the ways that the high school books kind of round out the whole time period in multiple different subject areas.
Okay, so Bible for ninth grade. We will start with the New Testament. This is the life of Jesus. It's a narrative of the life of Christ. As you start, when the children are young, you have an overview, then you read the Gospels for yourself, and now we're back to kind of an overview of just Christ's life. So this particular one is a really good narrative. We would not necessarily suggest that you use the same translation for something else, but as you're reading through that, then you'll be able to get the whole picture in chronological order as it places together. The scriptures are also listed in there, so you know exactly where you're reading from. Another source we use in Bible for that high school grades is the Cultural Background Study Bible. And one thing to know about it is that it's not a commentary. It really is about the cultural and historical and cultural settings that you'll be talking about as you read through scripture. There are several different articles you'll find. Some of them may be assigned, and some of them you can just let your student choose, which will talk about specific things. Like this one is Hezekiah's tunnel. And so when you're reading about things in the Old Testament, as you go through, those things will come up and provide a little bit of background for you to notice words or artifacts or different things that will come up for the scriptures that you're reading. One of the other things that we have that will also impact that is unearthing the Bible. And this is specifically archaeological discoveries. And so those will be assigned according to when they come into play as well. So when you're reading a specific scripture, you'll be assigned the pages, and the student will be able to go look at the actual artifact and read a little bit about it. That's
which
a really interesting, brings kind of the Bible to life a little bit too.
is really nice for Book of Centuries there as well. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's a great resource.
So we actually add a lot of the resources in with the Bible studies and the assigned scriptures as we're reading through them, including the Ultimate Bible Atlas. It's a really good atlas that for the different time frames that you're studying in the different places, you're going to find different maps and artifacts and information, but each thing will be assigned and listed when you are going through and reading those scriptures. So for church history, we also have two different books that we use. Just hold those up here. And you really need to read both of them together. They kind of round each other out. It is not a theological background. This is really about the history of what's happening in the early church and moving forward. You'll use these for several different rotations. And we don't read the whole thing. We have the chapters assigned for the specific time period so that it's a very manageable outline and a little bit of more depth for church history for each one. In ninth grade, we also cover Bible history, and we use God's Big Picture for that, and it gives a complete overview of Scripture from the beginning of the Old Testament all the way through Revelation, and it talks about God's kingdom plan throughout that whole time and how it fits together. So this is a really good time frame to spend the whole year. It's divided out over the 3 terms. We'll spend the whole year looking through the overview of how the Bible is put together and what does that mean and how's the unfolding plan happening.
And we'll move into talking a little bit about English subject. And one of the books that's used for ninth grade is the essay Voyage. And this is Michael Clay Thompson. If you haven't been familiar with him before, he is an energetic master teacher. He's very excited and passionate about his subject, and he does some of the grammar that we use, and also the composition books coming up through the grades. And Essay Voyage is a great introduction to just the ideas and the important pieces of what's needed for good essay writing. But he does it in a way that it really dovetails well with what we're doing in the rest of the lesson plans in our composition, where we're having specific teaching and using narrations all the way through the different subjects, and having a dedicated time really just for composition now in the upper grades, which is different than in the lower grades. So it's a very smooth transition to help them in just expanding their writing. So we're looking forward to that. And moving into geography here, the Prisoners of Geography has been a staple for several years now, and we have used this because it covers what's happening across the globe politically and how the geography affects that. So it's really a fascinating look at what do mountains play? What role do they play in keeping countries that have been separated? How has that played out into the political sphere? We've used it for several years, but this year what's new is there's also a book that will be going with it that is called it's sort of a younger version of the same book. So it's Our World Explained. But the beauty of it for us is that it has the emphasis on the map itself. So because we pair the Prisoners of Geography book with map making, here's an example of that. It's going to give more help or more support for your students that are trying to make their own maps as they're reading. This will give them sort of a framework and a picture of, okay, here's what's happening in the area. Here's some things that I could add to my map. Here's some ways that I can depict this to help me understand the chapters, as well as to help me have this mental picture of the area. That's one of the goals that Mason was always about for geography, is that it would, by reading it and by making the maps, we would have like a whole like a mental maps of all the different places that you could pull up, whether it's you're listening to current events or reading other books and literature and history, that you would have that picture of where is this taking place? What's the chessboard of where these events are happening? So we're looking forward to how that's going to be of help in just that building those skills of making your own maps as you're reading through it. And then also with geography, we have frequently a historical piece that fits into the time period. So in this case, we're doing Sailing Around the World, Alone Around the World, Joshua Slocum, and it is considered one of the most best written adventurous sailing stories of the time period. So we are, we think the students are just going to love this. Who would have, the things that he runs into and the events that happen to him and how he tells them are really amazing. So it's one of my favorite books.
So as we move into history, for the upper years, we have a few different spines, and we also have a few different books that will change because it chronologically follows with the topical time frame. So our main history spine for U.S. history is this one by Romini. It's very approachable, and we use it for all rotations and all grades. The ones I'm really excited about this year is in term 1, we'll be reading about the years of dust. It's the story of the Dust Bowl. And there are so many really important pieces as we talk through this for the whole semester, because it brings in the Great Depression and some of the migration from the Central Plains to California. And it shows what's going on during the time frames, what's happening in different places. And so you have these pictures, because pictures are a really big, important part this year for the 20th century. And you see so many things about what's happening. So this is going to be a really good book to fill out American history, to show what's going on during that time frame. There are other things going on in different parts of the country, but this will pull that together and show the migration towards California and in the time frame of the Dust Bowl. And it actually also covers a lot of ecology and brings that forward as well. So the importance of how we manage our crops and what do we do with all of that, it comes into play as well. So I'm looking forward to a lot of good discussions with students on this one. So as we mentioned, the pictures are a really important part of history this year. The onset of photography and media, and using a lot of different books. We're going to be using some photographic historical essays and journalism along the way through all terms. It will cover American and even go into world history at different points, and with the different kinds of things we'll talk about with the different events. It helps us to see, as students of history, the things that other people see too, not only during their time, but how these same photographs are used differently in our time today, and what we should think about that. How do we look towards those pictures, and what do they really mean at the time and how they're used now? One of the things that also shows up is TV, as that begins to be more prevalent as well. This is one we use for helping us to see, okay, what changes? What are those, not just the photographs, but using TV and how it changes the way we look at politics, world events. And we'll go through that as we talk more about the world history as well. One other piece that, because of the same kind of time frame, when we're talking about different media, we're in a world today where we're doing a lot of we're looking at history in different ways, not just historical novels, but some of the movies that we'll see that will also kind of incorporate in the second and third terms, especially. This is one of the ones that really brings forward it's based on a true story, The Bridge of Spies, and it brings forward a picture of what's going on in the 50s and 60s and the beginning of the Cold War, and the concern with communism and spies, and how that impacts America and the way Americans feel about politics, their culture, their nation, all kinds of things. And so we'll be bringing in the different kinds of media as we talk about history as well. We talked about the U.S. history, and now we need to talk about a little bit more about the world history and how the different books are used for ninth grade. We actually have a really beautiful book.
Mm-hmm.
This is the older version. You'll see the newer version as well that you guys will order. It's The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan, but it's this is the illustrated version specifically for younger children. So it's a little bit younger than you would normally get in ninth grade, but because the American history book is a little bit heavier, we want to balance those things out. But you get a good chapter overview of what's happening each term, and we read different chapters per term. It's also used for ancient history as well. So this is a book that you're going to want to get and be able to use over multiple rotations and for different history timeframes. Another book that we used, this one continues from last year. It will go over all 4 rotations as well. It is also a young people's version of the book by Charles Mann. That it's from Columbus's voyage to globalization. It is really truly a world history, not an American history book. So don't let the title confuse you on that. And one of the things that it does is that it reaches back and reaches forward in time. And so you're covering almost topically, but bringing in things that you've learned before and things that you're going to be talking about more in depth later. So it's a really good overview for a younger audience as well. So this one goes for grade 7, 8, and 9. And I think as you finish up this year, it brings us into the 20th century, and it will round out some of the things that you've studied from last year as well. Of course, because the time frame for the first term is World War I, we've got a lot of wars we're covering this year for history. This is a really good outline of World War I. It shows inside, you'll see the pictures that people were seeing and the propaganda that's being used, both good and bad, and to see how what's going on in the world in the different places are captured and shown to a different audience, whether that's in Europe or in Great Britain or in the U.S. It shows the different pictures and different times, and helps us follow what's going on during the World War I for that. With the final part to round out, one of a really good way to do that is to use historical novels. And this is a historical novel about World War I that deals with a boy and his family, and actually really PTSD. It's a good way of introducing that in a way to discuss and understand a little bit better, especially as we move forward into World War II and the Vietnam War and other things that are going on. This is a really good way to introduce how do you deal with emotions as a family and go through war together, and what does that look like? So this is the historical novel we use for the first term. We have 2 or 3 more I wanted to show you about. This is a really good one because there's so much going on with World War II. Wherever you are in the world, there's other things going on, and so this is a little bit more of an outline. They're pretty concise. It's a pretty concise discussion of the battles and the places and why they were there. So it actually gives a little bit of background from World War I, moving into World War II, what was going on in the world, whether that's in Europe or in Asia. And these things right here will help us pull together a lot of that confusion as you start studying World War II and see where all this history is taking place and who is where and what's happening in those time frames. And so this will be a good way to pull that together. Mm-hmm. The last book I want to tell you about is one by Russell Friedman. This is a very thorough, age-appropriate, which is difficult to find, story of the history of the war in Vietnam. Why did it start? How did it start? And this is a world view of the Vietnam War, what was happening in Vietnam a long time ago that set up a conflict there between the nations around them, and then how it moves forward in time. So it takes you through the whole history really of Vietnam and gives you a good background setting to say, what was this about? Why was it even important? Who was involved before the U.S. was even there? And it also, of course, has a lot of pictures that that are part of our nation and the world's understanding of what was happening in Vietnam. And of course, it's a very difficult topic, and I think this is a good book that will help help high schoolers understand clear pictures without getting too bogged down in the details of prisoners of war, that it talks about all those things. It just does it in an age appropriate way. So I'm pretty excited about this book.
And one other piece of that too that made me think about it when you were saying the different books that we've used through the several rotations, that if people are new, it's okay, right? Like they'll be able to pick up with those chapters and not feel like you've got to go back and read the whole books to get to the point that are used in the lesson plans. So no worries on that. Like the point of the book is it goes through several, but what we're going to be using, you can jump in right there with this time period.
Yeah, and that's really true for the several different ones. It pretty seamlessly works through, and there's so much with history as the pivot in a Mason education. There's so much that goes around that a lot of those details will also be filled in by the other books that you're reading. So I mentioned for ancient history, we use the Silk Roads for the illustrated version. It's also for ancient history. And I wanted to show you a couple of different things that we'll be doing. One of the main things we do in ninth grade for ancient history is source documentation. And so those are provided in the lesson plans. There'll be art and artifacts and different things to look at, whether that's online or a picture that's provided or a PDF even that's provided for you. So that helps round out the whole time frame. But there's a couple of things that we do use, a couple of books. In the first term, we kind of jump back with ninth grade and cover a little bit of the rise of Christianity and what's been happening during the early time frames of that. And so about a little bit before 300 and around 300, that's when we pick up with this. And so you're going to get to know more about what are the early church people doing? What are the church fathers about? And this one specifically covers the church women and where they come into play in church history and in just the time frame. The other thing is this one is a really interesting book that takes you through Byzantium and up through some of the really interesting people and gives you a good perspective of maybe everything that we've been thinking about the Dark Ages is not quite as dark, and that there are many things going on, and that even Attila the Hun is an amazing leader during that time frame, and just how all the politics and all the cultures clash and interact, and that this is a good book that will show us that in ancient history for ninth grade.
Which is really a good way to think about the upper years as a whole, isn't it? When you said that, it just made me realize that we're able to broaden out now and fill in and nuance things. So more voices, more understanding of things that are looking at it from different perspectives. So I think that is definitely, like what you're saying, is going to be helpful. Certainly a book like that where, yes, we have one sort of cultural understanding of, the Dark Ages, but wait, there's actually more going on, and there was more people involved, and there's more of there's different things that add to that, giving us a more broad view of that time. So that's going to be a really great book for that.
Cultural history really does cover many different areas. And so we might be concentrating on American history, we might be concentrating on world history in different parts of the world. All of those things depends upon what's going on with the rest of the books during the term so that it fits together very well. For grade 9, the cultural history that we use for this first term rounds out more about what's going on from the eyes and the experience of children in the Dust Bowl. And this is a true story of a school that's created in Southern California where the migrants have gone. It also uses a lot of photographs, and it tells you about what's happening in their lives and what's going on with the migrant workers. So this is a really important piece that shows us a bit of culture from the time frame in America of the Dust Bowl. So this book is used during term 2 when we start talking about World War II, where the idea of communism and fear and who's the enemy, who's the public enemy of the United States comes into play. And this is the time in our history when we want to talk about the Japanese internment and what happened to American Japanese and a huge group of people that were imprisoned during that time frame. And this is through the eyes of memories of a child during that time. Our last cultural history book takes us across into the Middle East, and Elizabeth Laird wrote this book. She has a lot of experience living in the Middle East and has worked a lot with refugees. And so this is a book that is a fiction that takes us through the Syrian upheaval and revolution. And so this is how his family deals with that, how they escape, and how they are in a refugee camp, and what is that like. So this is a really important an important subject and a great way to be able to look at that and deal with those ideas. One of the things that books do, right, is help us deal with ideas and think through things and present them. Some of them may be based on true stories, some of them may be historical fiction. But as we talk about history, there's so much this term, well, actually the whole year, that deals with many different ideas that our students, we're going to want to talk through them with our students. And these different books give a really good way of living in someone else's shoes during that time. As we talk about history, we also include a lot of different source documents, and those may be international, they may be national, they're different things for the time. So whatever is going along with our history and some source documentation where you can actually read or hear the things that are going on, that helps us understand from a very direct point rather than a lot of interpretation in between. So the source documents we use, we include those throughout high school. This is one of my favorite ones, and I want to make sure that you know about this. This is a great, it's a book, but it's also audio, and you can also stream it, of course. And one of the things that this is read by the author, so David McCullough, a noted historian, reads his own speeches. And so these speeches were given at different times, whether it's a different event or a college commencement speech. But these are really important pieces of history for us to deal with and think about the ideas of that go on longer than just the moment. And so this is a really good audio for you to make sure your student's listening to.
There's nothing like, you can read them, it's fine, but there's nothing like hearing David McCullough give those speeches and just feeling his love and passion for those topics that he's talking about in there. So it's special to be able to even have that option.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Next, we're going to talk about literature for 9th grade, and I want to start with poetry. The 20th century has a lot of poetry that will be included in the lesson plans. It's really important that you not let your student free with just any 20th century poetry, partly because of the topics they're covered, the wars and the things that they're talked about. It can bring in some very mature themes. So just know that these are very carefully curated for the appropriate level for our students. So 20th century poetry is included, but we don't have a very specific book that we want you to buy for that. We're going to include that in the lesson plans because of those things. We do, however, have a couple of different ones. We also focus on each term different poets from the time frame. So like in the first term, we'll talk more about Robert Frost and have some of his poetry as well as Yeats. In the second term, we have T.S. Eliot, but we also have a book that I'm very excited about. It is a collection of poems. It's really a memoir by the author, Marilyn Nelson. And it's how she moves through, as a child, from her eyes, as she moves through the civil rights movement and the Red Scare that we just talked about in history. All of those things that pass through her life as a child are told through poetry as a memoir of her life. So this is a really good, approachable way of hearing poetry and seeing modern poetry. as well. The last one I'll share with you is this this day. It's collected in New Sabbath poems by Alveary. And they're a little bit different in the poetry. It's a lot more reflective and spiritual in nature. And so we include these in the last term, as there's been so many things that are heavier, and it gives us poetry can give us a time to think and reflect about who we are as people, and our and your students can also experience that as they're reading through poetry and thinking about things, giving our souls a little bit of a rest. And so that specifically is about Wendell-Berry's poetry for term 3.
And that's a good overview too of how we like to think about the whole year, where we might have some of these harder subjects or some of these harder ideas that are their events and people in their situations. But when you look at the whole curriculum, there's balance, and there's those hopeful things, right? There's the piece that it's not all war. There was lots of other things that were happening in this time period. So I think poetry is a good place for that to kind of shine, I think.
It does. And other places in literature as well, that can happen. So we can bring in different voices from different places and see what is happening in the time frame, but also just the thoughts of people. This is a really big time frame for children's literature and short stories. And so Tubby the Dairyman, you'll probably know it closer to being the Fiddler on the Roof. So that is, we actually also watch that video, or stream it. Sorry, that's my age. Stream your video, stream from Amazon Prime, the videos, and we'll have a few of those during this term for literature as well. And so these are short stories that help us see in a positive light sometimes, the funny parts of life. For term 3, we also use Patrick McManus. His short stories, it's called The Good Samaritan Strikes Again, and his short stories are just fun and light, and but they're classic too. So they bring all that together for us as we see how a lot of literature tells about the time, but also allows us to enjoy words and stories, even in the midst of when we're doing dystopian novels as well in the last term. So all of it rounds out together, and we have a good selection that allows for that balance. As for plays, we have not just Shakespeare included in the high school years, but we also have more other important works. So we have some things like based on the children's literature. There's a play that's provided, and then we have more modern plays that are also used as well in term 2, and then we also include the one Shakespeare as well. So we have a bigger, rounder picture, and includes different kinds of plays as well and literature for that.
And then to wrap it up, we'll just talk briefly about science. So we're continuing to always evaluate just fun and fascinating different books on different topics that we add to the high school science library, so that are used as free reads to go along when your student just needs something else to read and is fascinated by a different subject. So that's always available. But as we go through the years in the sciences, we're now entering for 9th grade more of the disciplinary studies. So we use this introductory physics by John Mays. He is, again, very passionate about his topic and loves physics. And he really does a good job of just stepping the students through the basics and thinking about it of how does the math and the science and the physics go together, and how do we understand the language of science and how it explains what's happening in our world. So we will be adding some more supports and help too, so for the teachers and the students to really find that a enjoyable kind of introduction to this next level of science relationships. We build them as we go along. We're outside and we're observing, and now we're moving kind of more into the discipline of those different subjects. So that should be a wonderful part of the day. There's labs that go with that, and there will be support for that as well. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. We look forward to a wonderful year.